I decided to build one of the most complicated desks in the world with the skill and planning of a headless chicken in a woodworking shop. I had no idea how it would end, and honestly, neither will you. I first saw this desk on Facebook. I fell in love with it, and I decided I had to make it. So I drew this masterpiece. All the crucial details are here. A few lines, some boxes, and enough dimensions to confuse even my grandma. And just like my grandma's recipes, the final result didn't look anything like this. With that, I grabbed my tools, ignored my better judgment, and started with the legs, the part that could easily ruin everything before I'd even begun. Step 1. Picking the wood, which sounds easy, but of course, the slabs I needed were buried under every single other slab in the pile. Lumber seems to follow the same law as socks in the dryer. The one you want is always the hardest to reach. So, after playing lumber Jenga for half an hour, I finally dragged out this monster. 3 meters long, 80 centimeters wide, and just heavy enough to make me question every life choice that led me to woodworking. At this point, the build was less fine furniture and more pre-hernia screening. Once I got it on the bench, I realized something important. My track saw was shorter than the slab, which meant multiple cuts, more clamping, and the kind of math that makes you wonder if geometry is actually out to get you. Not long enough. That's what she said. The first cut went okay. The second one, not so much. The slab almost flattened my toes, and I discovered my reflexes are only slightly faster than falling oak. And then came the edges. My saw couldn't cut deep enough, so I had to finish with a handsaw, because nothing says professional woodworking like switching from power tools to caveman mode halfway through a job. By the time I split the slab, rotated it around in the shop 3 times, and covered every single surface with sawdust, I finally managed to turn one giant slab into something vaguely resembling boards. It wasn't elegant, and it wasn't efficient, but it was progress. And in this build, that was going to be rare enough to celebrate. Now that I had slabs, I could actually move without needing a forklift. It was time to break them into rough lumber. Sounds simple, just measure, cut, and done. Except, I didn't actually know the exact dimensions I needed, because my plan was basically some doodles and wishful thinking. So I spent the better part of a day pretending I knew what I was doing. Measuring, second guessing, remeasuring, and finally just committing with the saw. Of course, every cut felt like a gamble. Will this board be long enough? Wide enough? Or am I accidentally building the world's first Cavour desk for Hobbit? The track saw did most of the heavy lifting here, but I still managed to make things difficult. Short clamps, crooked lines, and a constant battle against one universal truth in woodworking. Boards are never as flat as you want them to be. At one point, I almost convinced myself I had it all figured out, until I realized I'd cut one piece so close to the limit that if I sneezed on it, I would have been too short. Precision, right? By the end of the day, I had piles of boards scattered all around the shop. To anyone else, it looked like chaos. To me, it looked like, well, chaos, but with a vague promise that one day it might resemble furniture. It wasn't clean, it wasn't pretty, but I finally had the bones of the project ready for the next stage. And somehow, despite all the winging it, I still hadn't run out of oak yet, which was probably my biggest victory so far. These are the first two. These are going to be the legs. Why am I building the legs first? It's because based on this, I'll get the dimensions for the right side of the desk and the left drawer, and this is also the most difficult part. If I manage to do this, then building some drawers shouldn't be that hard, except for some joinery, but we'll see. But before cutting the legs, first I need to joint these and plane these to have them really nice. Let's get out the jointer. Next up, planing and jointing, which is basically taking my rough, twisted boards and convincing them to behave like proper lumber. Now, if you've ever used the jointer planer combo machine, you'll know that it's a little bit like doing yoga with power tools. You want everything smooth, square, and perfectly aligned, while also praying you don't accidentally take off more material than you meant to. The first passes were terrifying. Every board screamed through the blades like I was torturing it, and honestly, I was just as scared as the wood. One wrong move, and suddenly you're holding firewood instead of furniture. Little by little though, the transformation happened. Twists flattened out, rough marks disappeared, and what started as tree-shaped chaos began to look like furniture-shaped order. It's one of those rare moments in woodworking where the shop actually feels calm. Like, for a brief second, I almost knew what I was doing. Not to say it was graceful. I still wrestled each board like it was trying to escape, filled the whole shop with mountains of shavings, and at one point I was wondering if my dust collector was going to die of a heart attack. But by the end of the session, I had stacks of crisp, flat, straight boards, ready to actually start looking like parts of a desk. For once, I felt like I was winning. So, it's the next day. These bad boys had time to settle. I usually don't work with wood once I plane it and pass it through the jointer because it needs about 24 hours to settle. It may curve, it may create issues for you. So now that at least 24 hours have passed since we've planed these, it's time to work on them. What we're gonna do is we're gonna cut them diagonally because each of these two pieces will be one leg. Well, half of each piece is gonna be one leg. So I'm gonna draw some lines here. I'm gonna show you exactly how I'm gonna do it. And we're gonna cut them, and then we're gonna start mocking them up so we can create our layout and cut them, create the mortise and tenon, do everything that we need. So let's get started. With the boards finally flat and square, it was time to cut them down into blanks for the legs. Basically, the moment I realized geometry can be as dangerous as power tools. One wrong angle here, and instead of a desk, I'd be building a very stylish oak pretzel. The cuts looked simple on paper, but lining them up in real life felt like defusing a bomb with a tape measure. Every pass of the saw was a mix of math, prayer, and hoping I still had enough wood left if I screwed it up. Somehow, the diagonals came out close enough to work. Not perfect, but at least they looked more like legs than firewood. First, I tackled the long legs. Straight cuts, big boards, nothing really fancy. At least, that's what I told myself. But when you're moving chunks of oak this size, even a straight cut feels like you could end the whole project. One slip, one wobble, and suddenly you're wondering how fast does oak burn in the fireplace. After that, my attention went back to the small legs. I had already made them siblings, but now they had to be twins. Identical. Which, of course, is much easier said than done. The only method that I could think of was clamping them together and running them through the jointer at the same time. Risky? Absolutely. Safe? not even close. But it was either that or spend the next 2 days trying to send them into submission. And let's be honest, nobody has that kind of patience. The thing is that once you put the pieces side by side, you start to see every tiny difference. A corner that's out by a millimeter, a twist that shows up when you least expect it. Suddenly, it feels less like woodworking and more like babysitting. Constantly asking them, why can't you two behave? Once the twins finally lined up, I had to shave off a diagonal so they'd sit flush with the long legs, which meant more lines, more scribing, and more measuring. And no matter how many times I measured, I still didn't feel it right. So I measured again. And again. At some point, I wasn't woodworking anymore. I was just slowly losing my mind with a tape measure in my hand. Every cut felt like a gamble. One wrong move, and instead of a desk, I'd be building the world's most expensive pair of chopsticks. Or even worse, some kind of modern art sculpture no one would understand. Ah, yes, it's called Despair in Oak. Very deep. Finally, after way too much second guessing, a lot of sketchy setups, and even sketchier cuts, I had something that looked like a leg. Rough, uneven, a little questionable, but recognizably a leg. And that was enough to call it progress. So I put it on the bench, stared at it for a while, and decided not to touch it anymore. Because sometimes progress isn't about making it perfect. Sometimes it's just knowing when to stop before you ruin it. Now came the joinery. Mortise and tenon joints. The kind of thing master woodworkers brag about at parties, while beginners like me usually just try not to cry. The first one I cut looked like it had been chewed on by a drunk guy with a pocket knife. I tried every tool in the shop. Chisels, saws, routers. If it had a blade, I gave it a shot. And somehow, I still managed to butcher it. But here's the thing. Every disaster has a free lesson. By the second joint, I learned enough to fake being competent. I shaved down the corners, adjusted my feet, and for the first time, the pieces actually came together without looking like a crime scene. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but woodworking has this magical moment when two pieces of wood actually lock together and stay put. I'm not gonna put it in because I don't know if I can take it out. It's a very tight fit. Yeah, screw it. I tried it. With a little bit of more hammering, I think it's gonna go in. If not, we can just get a little bit more deeper. That moment when you realize, okay, maybe this ridiculous desk isn't impossible after all. Of course, I still had glue-ups ahead of me, which meant finding out just how much adhesive I could get on my hands, the clamps, the floor, and somehow in my hair. But for now, victory! My legs had joinery, and miraculously, they weren't falling apart. Now that the joints actually fit, it was time for the glue-up. Every woodworker's favorite moment of truth. If you've never done one, here's how it works. You apply glue, add clamps, panic, add more clamps, panic harder, and pray. Glue-ups are basically a stress test, not just for your project, but for your sanity as well. Mine went about as well as you'd expect. Within seconds, I had glue on the wood, glue on the clamps, glue on the floor, and somehow glue in my ears. I don't even know how that happened. But despite my best attempts at sabotage, the legs stayed together. They weren't pretty, but they were solid. And for this desk, this was a miracle. For now, I could breathe. The first big hurdle was done. The legs were standing. And so was I. Now that the glue held, the next challenge was making both legs the same width. Because if they weren't, the desk would forever look like it was limping into the room. Not exactly the statement piece I was going for. So I grabbed the sander, basically a handheld torture device that spits dust directly into your lungs and soul. Within minutes, my shop looked like a cocaine bust gone wrong, and my arms felt like I've been wrestling a jackhammer. Every pass of the sander brought me closer, or so I hoped. Honestly, I couldn't tell if the legs were getting flatter or if I was just vibrating myself into another dimension. But eventually, the two legs actually looked like twins. Identical twins? No. More like siblings who grew up in different diets. But close enough. This desk was finally standing on even ground. This was the moment I'd been dreading since the beginning. Cutting the big radius. The curve that defines the entire leg. And the part where one wrong move could turn weeks of work into expensive firewood. I started small, trimming the ends, trying to convince myself it wasn't a big deal. But then came the real cut. Picture this: me, a router, the wrong bit, and absolutely no backup plan. What could possibly go wrong? The router screamed, oak chips flew everywhere, and my heart rate hit levels usually reserved for marathon runners. Halfway through, I was sure I'd rather ruin the leg or just pass from the stress. And here's the kicker. I still had to make the second leg match the first one, which was like trying to draw Mona Lisa twice with a Sharpie. I can't use it because the length here is just shy of what I need. Well, I can use it. It's just gonna take 10 times longer because I'm gonna just cut like 1 millimeter at a time, but we'll get there. So let's do it like that. But somehow, against all odds, both legs ended up looking like they belonged to the same desk. Not perfect, but at least not like a pirate with a peg leg. So now as a close-up, as you can see, it's exactly as the other one, just here in the corner, which I'm just gonna shave off. I'm gonna sand it because it's faster. So much dust. This is what happens when you do woodworking. And that's where I'll stop for now. Two legs glued, sanded, and carved into shape. And somehow they actually look like they belong to the same desk. But this is just the beginning. Next time, I'll be tackling the cabinets, with drawers that, spoiler alert, don't actually go as planned. So if you want to see me wrestle oak, argue with my tools, and try to salvage what's left of my sanity, stick around for part 2. Oh, and if you thought the legs were stressful, trust me, you haven't seen anything yet.